At 2:15 in the morning, on August 7, 1944, the fog outside Mortain was so thick that sound arrived before shape, and death arrived before warning. Sergeant Robert Callahan did not see the German tanks. He heard them. Low, heavy diesel engines, steel treads biting into wet pavement, the distinct mechanical rhythm of Panther road wheels, different from American Shermans, deeper, slower, more deliberate. The kind of sound you could recognize even if you'd never fought blind before. Callahan was 26 years old. He had spent 11 months with the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion. He had trained for anti-tank combat his entire adult life. He had never trained for this, because nobody trained for fighting armor you couldn't see. In front of him sat a 3-inch M5 anti-tank gun. 3 tons of steel, towed into position days earlier, dug into the Norman earth by hand. It fired a 76mm shell capable of killing a German Panther, if you could aim it. That morning, visibility was 15 feet. The fog had rolled in after midnight, a dense summer ground fog that erased the landscape completely. Hedgerows vanished, roads disappeared, fields became nothing but gray voids. If a tank was coming toward you, you wouldn't know until it was close enough to kill you. And they were coming. 4 German Panzer divisions had been committed to Operation Ludick, Hitler's last major counteroffensive in Normandy. Nearly 200 tanks, including elite SS formations, were moving west toward the narrow corridor at Avranches. If they broke through, they could cut off Patton's Third Army and unravel the Allied breakout from Normandy. Standing in their way were 12 American guns. 12. Company A of the 823rd Tank Destroyer Battalion had arrived at Mortain 3 days earlier alongside the 30th Infantry Division. Their weapons were towed guns, static, exposed, and notoriously difficult to survive once engaged. Once you emplaced a towed gun, you did not retreat under fire. You stayed. Or you died. Callahan's crew had dug in on the eastern approach to town. They built hasty earthworks, camouflaged the gun trails, stacked ammunition in neat piles by touch alone. Armor-piercing rounds, high explosive rounds, each shell heavy enough to strain the loader's back. They waited. The 823rd had seen what happened when German armor appeared suddenly. 3 weeks earlier, near St. Lo, they had lost guns and crews when Panthers burst through hedgerows faster than anyone expected. A towed gun could kill a tank, but only if it fired first. That night, battalion intelligence had warned them. German armor was massing east of Mortain. 4 divisions. 1st SS Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. 2nd SS Das Reich. 2nd Panzer Division, 116th Panzer Division. The names alone carried weight. These were not second-rate units. These were experienced armored formations pulled together for one desperate blow. The 30th Infantry Division held a 20-mile front with 3 regiments. The 823rd had only 12 guns spread across that line. Company A near Mortain, Company B near Saint-Barthélemy, Company C in reserve. 12 guns against the largest German armored assault since D-Day. Callahan had spent the night studying the tactical math. His M5 gun could penetrate a Panther's side armor at 1,500 yards. The frontal armor was another matter. Thick, sloped, unforgiving. At close range, with the right angle maybe. But all of that assumed one thing. You could see the target. The fog erased that assumption entirely. At midnight, radio traffic went silent. Battalion headquarters ordered complete radio silence to avoid giving away positions. No updates, no warnings, no coordination. Now Callahan heard only the engines. Closer. Multiple vehicles. A column. Panthers moved differently than Shermans. Lower engine note, heavier mass. Callahan counted them by ear. 6, at least. Probably more behind them. The gun crew waited. 5 men. Gunner. Loader. 2 ammunition handlers. Callahan standing just behind the shield, hands clenched, eyes useless in the fog. They had trained at Camp Hood, Texas, with clear lines of sight and known distances. Nobody had trained them to fight tanks they couldn't see. At 2:43 a.m., the first German tank fired. A sudden orange flash bloomed through the fog roughly 200 yards ahead. A split-second beacon in the gray. The shell screamed overhead and detonated somewhere behind Callahan's position. Then another flash. Another tank firing blind. And in that moment, Callahan understood the entire fight. If he could see their muzzle flashes, they could see his. The first crew to fire would die, but staying silent meant dying anyway. He had seconds to choose. Shoot at fire he couldn't see, or wait until a Panther rolled close enough to erase his position entirely. Callahan raised his hand, a sharp signal. The gunner traversed left toward the fading glow of the flash. The loader slammed a high-explosive round into the breech. They had no armor-piercing loaded. No time to switch. Fire now, or lose the gun. At 2:45 a.m., the M5 fired. The recoil drove the trails 6 inches back, into the dirt. The muzzle flash lit the fog like a spotlight. For 3 seconds, everything was visible. The hedgerow, the road, the fields. Then darkness again. Callahan had just announced his position to every German tank in range. 15 seconds passed, then an explosion erupted ahead. A secondary detonation. Ammunition cooking off. They had hit something. They had fired blind and connected. But now the Germans knew exactly where they were. Callahan didn't wait. He counted to 10 and shouted the order. Displace. 5 men grabbed the trails and heaved. They dragged the gun 30 feet north, dropped it, dug frantically, loaded armor piercing. The Germans fired back, 3 tanks simultaneously. Their shells slammed into the ground where Callahan's gun had been less than a minute earlier. The fog had saved them. The Germans were shooting at memory, not at reality. And that was when Callahan realized something terrifying. This could work, but only if they kept moving, only if they kept gambling, only if they were willing to fire again. Callahan's crew worked in total darkness between shots, like burglars breaking into their own position. Hands on steel, boots sliding in wet grass, a shovel scraping earth as quietly as men could manage while their hearts hammered. The gun was heavy enough that every move cost time, and time was the only currency that mattered. Because the moment they fired, the moment the muzzle flash lit the fog, the Germans were no longer guessing. They were calculating. Callahan kept his eyes fixed on the gray wall ahead, searching for the only thing the fog would give him: light. At 2:52, another German muzzle flash appeared farther right, about 400 yards. The glow was small, but in fog it carried. The gunner adjusted by instinct. The loader rammed the armor-piercing round home. Callahan waited half a breath. Fire. The M5 cracked again. The flash ripped open the world for an instant, and then, after a pause that felt too long, there was a dull, heavy thump. Not a clean explosion. Not an artillery burst. A tank taking a hit. A moment later, flames rolled through the fog like a curtain catching fire. A Panther was burning. Shapes, crewmen, bailed out into the gray and vanished. The crew didn't celebrate. They didn't speak. The loader was already reaching for the next round, because now the Germans would shoot back. Callahan counted. 1, 2, 3. At 7 seconds, a shell screamed in and detonated behind them. At 9, another impacted their previous position and tossed dirt into the air. By the time the third shot arrived, Callahan's gun was already being dragged. 30 feet again, then 20. Then whatever the ground allowed. They weren't retreating. They were dodging death by feet. And it was working. Barely. The tactic was insane on paper. Fire at muzzle flashes. Displace immediately. Fire again before the enemy adjusts. It violated every principle of aimed anti-tank gunnery. But the fog made paper rules meaningless. In the fog, muzzle flash was the only target that existed. And the first crew to understand that would survive longer than everyone else. Within minutes, other guns in Company A began to do the same thing. A flash north, a flash south, another crack from somewhere behind a hedgerow. The battle became a nightmare light show. Orange blossoms appearing and disappearing in a world that otherwise didn't exist. Each flash was information. Each flash was also a death sentence. Callahan could hear the other guns like a heartbeat across the line. He could also hear the German response, multiple tanks firing at once, trying to smother each American position the moment it revealed itself. At 3:01 a.m., a gun 200 yards south took a direct hit. There was a heavy impact, then a sound like an entire shed collapsing, then the violent roar of ammunition detonating. And then nothing. One gun down, 11 remaining. The fog hid the bodies, it hid the screams, it hid the wreckage. But it did not hide the silence afterward. Callahan swallowed and forced his mind back into math. You couldn't afford grief in the middle of a firing sequence. Grief was a delay, and delays got you killed. The German column had stopped advancing. He could tell by the engines. The sound shifted, idling, revving, the clank of tracks pivoting in place. The Panthers were maneuvering, searching for angles, trying to flank the invisible gun line. Towed guns had a thin shield, enough to stop small arms fire sometimes. Against a 75mm tank round, it meant nothing. If a Panther got within 300 yards and got a clear shot, the crew died. No escape, no armor, no second chances. Callahan's crew stayed low behind the shield. The gunner kept the barrel centered on the only direction that mattered. The direction of the next flash. The fog magnified sound in strange ways. A tank could be half a mile away and sound like it was right on top of you. A tank could be 200 yards away and sound muted as if it were underwater. That uncertainty was its own weapon. At 3:12, a German muzzle flash erupted closer than before, maybe 200 yards. Too close. Callahan saw the glow, and realized the Panthers were getting bold. They were pushing forward under fog cover, gambling that the Americans would hesitate. He gave the signal instantly. Traverse, load, fire. The armor-piercing round slammed out into the fog. This time, there was no delay. A violent metallic crack rang out, followed by a roar. Hit. The crew dragged the gun again without waiting to confirm, because confirmation didn't matter. Survival did. By 3:20, another problem emerged out of the gray. Movement. Not tanks. Shapes. Low. Fast. Human. German infantry. Panzer grenadiers advancing on foot. They weren't charging randomly. They were probing, sweeping the hedgerows, feeling for the gun line the way a man in darkness feels for a doorway. Their job was simple. Find the American guns so the Panthers could kill them cleanly. Callahan's crew had one infantry weapon, a Thompson submachine gun carried by an ammunition handler. And that created an impossible choice. If you fired the Thompson, the muzzle flash would betray your position as surely as firing the main gun. If you didn't fire, the Panzer grenadiers would walk right up to the shield, throw grenades, and end the crew without the tanks even needing to see them. Callahan calculated again, like he was doing arithmetic with human lives. Let them get close as possible. Kill quickly, move instantly. The silhouette slid through the fog, closing to 60 feet. Callahan held his breath. 40 feet. 30. Then he made the decision. A sharp hand signal. The Thompson erupted, 3-round bursts, muzzle flash strobing in the fog. In the first seconds, 5 German infantrymen dropped and vanished into the grass. The rest scattered backward into the gray. But the damage was done. Every German tank within 800 yards now knew exactly where Callahan's gun was. The Panthers didn't need to see him. They could fire at the flash. Callahan shouted the order. Displace! Now! The crew abandoned the fighting position and dragged the M5 40 yards northwest, half running, half hauling. They were still digging it in when the first German tank round slammed into their old position. Then another. Then 3 more in rapid succession. The Panthers were concentrating fire on where the Thompson had fired from. Callahan felt a strange, cold gratitude. If they'd hesitated 10 seconds longer, they would have been vaporized in place. By 4:00 a.m., Company A had lost 5 guns, almost half their strength. But they had also destroyed at least 9 German tanks. The exchange rate was barely in their favor and only on paper. In reality, the Germans could afford losses. The Americans could not. The fog began thinning as dawn approached, but not enough to help. It became worse. Instead of 15 feet of visibility, you could now see 100 yards. That meant you could see just enough to die faster. German tanks could begin to identify shapes, coordinate fire, and push forward with more confidence. Callahan heard new engine sounds approaching from the west. American Shermans, reinforcements, 743rd Tank Battalion, moving up to support the gun line, and Callahan knew what that meant too. Shermans and fog against Panthers was math that didn't favor the Americans. The Sherman's 75mm gun struggled against Panther frontal armor at typical engagement ranges. A Panther could kill a Sherman from almost any angle. The radio crackled for the first time in hours. Battalion headquarters. Orders, hold, no retreat, no more displacing backward. The 30th Infantry Division was falling back to secondary defensive lines and Company A had to cover the withdrawal. Hold until the infantry got clear. Callahan checked ammunition. 47 rounds remaining, mixed armor-piercing and high explosive. At their current rate of fire, maybe 90 minutes. Dawn was at 6 to know. If they could survive until full daylight, air power could intervene. Thunderbolts, typhoons, rockets, and bombs. But daylight was still 2 hours away. 2 hours in fog. 2 hours with Panthers probing and infantry creeping. 2 hours where every muzzle flash could be the last thing they ever produced. At 4:30, another American gun took a direct hit. Callahan heard it. He saw the flash of detonation even through thinning fog. The sound was shorter this time. One violent concussion, then the crackling burn of ammunition cooking off. 6 guns left in Company A. The Germans were destroying them methodically, working north to south, eliminating each revealed position through concentrated fire. The tactical problem had changed. At first, the fog had been an equalizer. Now, as visibility improved, it became a countdown. Eventually, a Panther would get close enough for a clean shot. Eventually, the fog would lift, and when it did, the Panthers' armor and optics would matter more than the Americans' desperation. Callahan crouched behind the shield, listening again. The engines were closer now. The fog was no longer hiding the battlefield. It was hiding the moment of impact, and the worst part was what Callahan understood next. They were not fighting to win. They were fighting to delay. They were buying time with guns that couldn't move. Time for infantry to withdraw. Time for artillery to find range. Time for daylight. Time for aircraft. Time for the war itself to turn a fraction in the Americans' favor. And if they failed, if the German tanks punched through Mortain and reached Avranches, the entire Allied breakout from Normandy could fracture. Not next week, not tomorrow, that morning. That's why Callahan kept firing. That's why he kept moving his gun 30 feet at a time. That's why, even as Company A's line collapsed gun by gun, he held onto the only weapon the fog allowed. A muzzle flash. Because in that gray world, a muzzle flash wasn't just light. It was the only thing you could shoot at, and the only thing you could die for. By 4:45 a.m., the fog had thinned just enough to betray them. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough to turn vague shapes into threats. Callahan saw it before he heard it. A darker mass pushing through the gray directly ahead, no more than 300 yards out. A Panther tank, hull down behind a hedgerow, turret slowly traversing left to right like a predator tasting the air. The German commander couldn't see Callahan's gun yet, but he was close. Too close. This was no longer blind fighting. This was the moment every towed gun crew feared. At 300 yards, the M5 could penetrate a Panther's frontal armor. On paper. 80 millimeters sloped. Angle mattered. Impact point mattered. Ammunition quality mattered. And combat had a way of erasing theoretical advantages. Callahan's gunner was already laying the sight. The loader slid an armor-piercing round into the breech with hands that didn't shake because shaking wasted time. They would get one shot. Maybe two if... maybe luck intervened. Inside the Panther, the German gunner stopped traversing. The turret froze. He had seen something, a shadow, a shape, movement. Maybe just instinct honed by years of combat. Both crews understood the same truth at the same instant. Whoever fired second would not fire again. Callahan didn't shout. He didn't need to. He gave the signal. At 4:47 a.m., both guns fired simultaneously. The shells crossed paths in the fog like thrown knives. The German round struck the ground 6 feet in front of the American gun shield, skipped, ricocheted upward, passed over the barrel by inches, and detonated 30 yards behind the position. Callahan felt the concussion in his chest. Their round hit the Panther's mantlet. Steel punched steel. The shell penetrated the turret face and vanished inside. The Panther did not explode, it simply stopped. The turret locked mid-traverse. Smoke poured from the commander's hatch. No movement followed. The most dangerous kind? Of kill. A disabled tank still pointed at you. Callahan didn't wait to confirm destruction. He ordered displacement again, dragging the gun as fast as exhausted men could manage. 10 German tanks destroyed. 6 American guns left. The math was collapsing. At 5:00 a.m., the fog thinned enough to give visibility out to 200 yards in most directions. This should have helped. It didn't. Now the German tanks no longer needed to fire blind. They could identify gun shields. They could coordinate fire. They could advance with purpose. The Panthers had armor. The M5 crews did not. To the south, the sound of fighting intensified. Sharper cracks. American Shermans engaging. Callahan could hear the difference immediately. Sherman guns had a higher pitch than German 75mm cannons. Then he heard explosions. Then more. The Shermans were dying. At range, a Panther could penetrate a Sherman before the Sherman could respond effectively. Fog or no fog, that equation did not change. At 5:15, the radio crackled again. Battalion update. Company A had destroyed 8 German tanks. Company B near Saint Barthélemy had destroyed 3 more. 4 Shermans lost, 2 damaged. The German advance had slowed, but it had not stopped. The 2nd SS Panzer Division was pushing hard toward Mortain itself. If Mortain fell, the road to Avranches would open, and if Avranches fell, Patton's entire Third Army could be cut off west of the Seine. This wasn't a local fight anymore, it was a hinge in the campaign. Callahan checked ammunition again. 21 armor-piercing rounds left, no high explosive. Every shot from this point forward had to count. At 5:30, American artillery finally joined the fight. 105mm shells from the 230th Field Artillery Battalion screamed overhead and detonated among the German tanks. The blasts rocked the ground, threw dirt and debris into the air, forced Panzer Grenadiers to scatter and button up. The shells could not reliably destroy Panthers, but they could slow them, and slowing them was everything. Callahan used the barrage to reposition once more, dragging the M5 50 yards east into better defilade behind a stone wall. They were running out of ground to trade for time. The German tanks had pushed within 400 yards. Much closer, and displacement would become impossible. At 5:40, another American gun was overrun. Callahan saw it. German infantry swarmed the position from 2 directions while a Panther provided covering fire. The gun crew fought with small arms, held for perhaps 90 seconds, and then vanished into silence. 5 guns left. The sky began to brighten. Not sunlight yet, just the gray thinning into pale blue. Visibility stretched to 400 yards, then 500, and suddenly, the battlefield revealed itself. Callahan could see the scope of what they were facing for the first time. German tanks spread across nearly half a mile of front. At least 30 Panthers, and Panzer IVs visible. More behind them. The column stretched back toward the German lines like a steel river. 5 American guns. Against 30 tanks, with infantry support, no retreat. Limited artillery. Air support still an hour away. The math said they should already be dead. At 5:55, Callahan spotted movement to the north. 3 Panthers advancing in bounds using hedgerows for cover, attempting a coordinated flank. Professional. Disciplined. This was 2nd SS Das Reich. veterans of campaigns stretching back to 1940. Callahan understood his options instantly. Engage the flanking tanks and expose himself to frontal fire. Ignore the flank and die from the side, or abandon the gun and run. None of the options were good. At 6 a.m., the fog lifted completely, and everything changed. Callahan realized they had been fighting the wrong enemy the entire time. The 30 tanks to the east, the ones that had nearly destroyed Company A, were not the main attack. They were a screening force. The real German thrust had come through the valley 2 miles south. 2nd SS Panzer Division had already punched through near Saint-Barthélemy and was driving toward Avranches. Company A had been fighting a diversion, and the diversion had worked. For 4 hours, 5 to 12 American guns had tied down 30 German tanks, forced them to fight methodically, prevented them from reinforcing the main thrust at the critical moment. The tactical value was not in tanks destroyed, it was in tanks delayed. Radio traffic at 6:05 confirmed it. The German column had broken through elsewhere, but Hill 314 east of Mortain was still in American hands. That hill was everything. As long as American forward observers controlled Hill 314, they could see every German movement toward Avranches. Every column, every concentration, every attempt to maneuver. Artillery could reach anything that moved. The breakthrough was incomplete. The German tanks facing Callahan's position began pulling back at 6:15. Not retreating, repositioning. Their mission was done. So was Company A's. Callahan counted the cost. 5 guns lost. Roughly 30 men killed or wounded. 12 missing. In exchange, 11 confirmed German tanks destroyed, at least 6 more damaged, and 4 hours stolen from Hitler's last gamble in Normandy. At 6:20, the sky finally delivered what the gun crews had been dying for: American fighter bombers. Republic P-47, thunderbolts from the 9th Air Force roared in low, beneath the cloud cover. Rockets, 500-pound bombs, strafing runs. The Luftwaffe was nearly absent over Normandy by August 1944. German tanks had no air cover, no escape. Callahan watched a Thunderbolt fire 2 rockets into a Panther at 6:25. The tank exploded violently, turret lifting 6 feet off the hull before crashing back down. Another Panther tried to flee through a hedgerow. A bomb detonated 5 yards short. The concussion flipped the 45-ton tank onto its side. The withdrawal turned into a rout. German armor scattered east, racing for cover. Most didn't make it. By 8 a.m., 17 German tanks lay destroyed in front of Callahan's position. 11 by Company A's guns, 6 by airstrikes. Battalion headquarters ordered Company A to hold. No pursuit, no advance, just survive. Because the fight for Mortain wasn't over. It had simply changed shape. And what Callahan and his crew didn't yet know was this: the 4 hours they bought that morning would echo far beyond Mortain, far beyond Normandy, far beyond anything a towed gun was ever supposed to do. By 5:45 a.m., the fog had thinned just enough to become dangerous. Not enough to show you the battlefield. Just enough to show you the part that kills you. Callahan's world was still gray, still damp, still muffled. Yet now silhouettes began to exist. Hedgerows became outlines. Roads became darker streaks. And somewhere ahead, the enemy stopped being sound and started becoming shape. That shift mattered because the M5 gun didn't need a miracle to win. It needed one clean sight picture. A Panther at 300 yards was not a rumor anymore. It was a sentence. Callahan saw the tank first as a darker mass pressing through the haze. Hull down behind a hedgerow, turret drifting left to right in slow, patient sweeps. The movement was careful, professional. A crew that understood the fog was lifting and that the American guns would be easier to find now. The Panther commander couldn't see Callahan's gun yet, but he didn't have to see it for long. Callahan's gunner dropped his cheek to the sight. The loader already had armor piercing ready, hands moving with the kind of calm that only comes after you've watched men die. They had one shot, maybe 2 if luck stayed close. On paper, the M5 could penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at this range. 80 millimeters sloped. Angle matters. Ammunition quality matters. Impact point matters. Combat does not care what paper says. Inside the Panther, the turret stopped traversing. Frozen. The German gunner had seen something, a shape, a shadow, a flicker of movement near the shield. And both crews understood the same truth at the same instant. Whoever fired second would not fire again. Callahan didn't shout. He didn't need to. He gave the hand signal. At 4:47 a.m., both guns fired. The shells crossed in the fog like thrown hammers. The German round struck the ground 6 feet in front of the American gun shield, skipped, ricocheted upward, passed over the barrel by inches, and detonated behind the position. The blast slammed into Callahan's chest like a fist. Their round hit the Panther's mantlet. Steel punched steel. The shell penetrated the turret face and vanished inside. The Panther didn't explode, it simply stopped. Turret locked mid-traverse. Smoke poured from the commander's hatch. No crew bailed out. The most dangerous kind of kill. A tank that might still be alive inside. Callahan didn't wait. He ordered displacement. Because in the fog, confirmation was a luxury. Survival was the mission. The crew hauled the gun again. Boots sliding, hands burning on metal, breath coming in ragged pulls. 30 feet, then another 10. Then whatever the ground allowed, they were no longer repositioning for better angles. They were repositioning to stay alive. And now the fog was abandoning them. At 5 a.m., visibility stretched to 200 yards in most directions. That should have helped. It didn't. Now the Panthers didn't. The Panthers have to guess. They could begin to hunt. Callahan heard Shermans engaging south of the gun line. You could tell an American tank gun by its sharper crack, higher pitch than the German 75mm. For a moment, the sound was reassuring. Then the explosions began. Short, violent, final. Shermans were dying out there in the gray. Because fog doesn't change armor thickness, and it doesn't change mathematics. A Panther could kill a Sherman from ranges where a Sherman struggled to penetrate back. At 5:15, the radio crackled again, breaking hours of silence. Battalion update. Company A had destroyed 8 tanks. Company B had destroyed 3 more. 4 Shermans lost, 2 damaged. The advance had slowed, but it hadn't stopped. And the part that mattered most wasn't the numbers. It was the direction. The 2nd SS Panzer Division was still pushing toward Mortain. If Mortain fell, the road to Avranches opened. If Avranches fell, Patton's corridor could be severed. This wasn't a local fight anymore. It was a hinge in the campaign. Callahan checked the ammunition stack. 21 armor-piercing rounds left. No high explosive. Every shot from this point forward had to be against armor, had to penetrate, had to count. That's when American artillery arrived. At 5:30, 105mm shells from the 230th Field Artillery Battalion screamed overhead and detonated among the German positions. Dirt erupted. Branches shattered. The shockwaves hit the ground like punches. A 105 wouldn't reliably kill a Panther, but it could do something else. It could force Panzer Grenadiers to duck. It could make tank commanders button up. It could slow the whole machine down, and slowing them was everything. Callahan used the barrage like a curtain. While the shells fell, he dragged the gun into better defilade behind a stone wall. 50 yards felt like a mile. Each movement was heavier now, fatigue stacking on fatigue. The crew's hands were raw. Their shoulders screamed. Their minds were running on the thin edge between focus and collapse. And then another gun position went silent. At 5:40, Callahan saw German infantry swarm an American gun from 2 directions, while a Panther provided covering fire. The crew fought with small arms, held for maybe 90 seconds, and then nothing. 5 guns left in Company A. The sky began to brighten. Not sunlight, not warmth. Just the gray lifting into pale morning. Visibility stretched to 400 yards, then 500. And for the first time, Callahan saw what they were actually facing. German tanks spread across half a mile of front. At least 30 Panthers and Panzer IVs visible in the haze, more behind them like a steel river stretching east. 5 American guns against 30 tanks, with infantry support, no retreat, limited artillery, air support still an hour away. The math said they should already be dead. At 5:55, Callahan spotted movement to the north. 3 Panthers advancing in bounds, using hedgerows like cover, probing for a flank. Professional. Disciplined. This was Das Reich. This was not a panicked column. This was a machine. Callahan understood the options instantly. Engage the flank and expose yourself to frontal fire. Ignore the flank and die from the side. Or abandon the gun and run. None of them were good. And then, at 6 a.m., the fog lifted completely. And everything changed in one brutal second. Because the moment the battlefield became visible, Callahan realized something that made his stomach drop. They had been fighting the wrong enemy. The 30 tanks to the east, the ones that had nearly annihilated Company A, were not the main attack. They were a screening force. A diversion. The real thrust had come through the valley 2 miles south. The 2nd SS Panzer Division had punched through near Saint-Barthélemy and was already driving toward Avranches. Company A had been fighting a decoy, and the decoy had worked. For 4 hours, a handful of American towed guns had tied down 30 German tanks and forced them to fight methodically instead of reinforcing the breakthrough. The value wasn't only in tanks destroyed, it was in tanks delayed. At 6:05, radio traffic confirmed it. The German column had broken through elsewhere, but Hill 314 east of Mortain was still in American hands. That hill wasn't heroic to look at. It was simply higher ground. But in war, higher ground is power. From Hill 314, American forward observers could see every German movement toward Avranches. Every column, every regroup, every attempt to turn a breakthrough into a collapse. And as long as Americans could see, they could call artillery. And as long as they could call artillery, the German breakthrough could not become decisive. That is why Hill 314 became the real center of gravity. That is why the Germans never fully succeeded. At 6:15, the tanks facing Callahan began pulling back, not retreating, repositioning. Their mission was done. So was Company A's. Callahan counted the cost like a man counting missing teeth. 5 guns lost, roughly 30 killed or wounded, 12 missing. In exchange, 11 confirmed German tanks destroyed, at least 6 more damaged, and 4 hours stolen from Hitler's last gamble in Normandy. Then the sky delivered what the gun crews had been dying for. At 6:20, Republic P-47 Thunderbolts from the 9th Air Force arrived low under the cloud cover. No Luftwaffe, no contest. Just American fighter bombers hunting armor caught in daylight. Callahan watched a Thunderbolt fire rockets into a Panther at 6:25. The tank detonated in a violent bloom, turret lifting, then crashing back down like a lid slammed shut by God. Another Panther tried to flee through a hedgerow. A bomb detonated short. The concussion flipped the 45-ton machine onto its side. The German withdrawal became a rout. Panthers scattered east, racing for cover. Most didn't make it. By 8 a.m., 17 German tanks lay destroyed in front of Callahan's sector. 11 by Company A, 6 by airstrikes. And this is the part history often misses. Not the drama of explosions, not the list of divisions, not the kill counts, the timeline. Operation Luttich was built on speed, surprise, momentum. The fog gave the Germans surprise, but 12 American guns in the 30th Infantry Division took away momentum, and when momentum dies, offensives die with it. For the Germans, Mortain became a stalled machine, burning fuel and men for hours it could not afford. For the Americans, those hours became the difference between a breakthrough being cut off and a breakthrough becoming irreversible. Because while Callahan's crew fought for feet of ground in the fog, Hill 314 held. And while Hill 314 held, German armor could not move unseen. American artillery rained down on columns trying to regroup. By August 8th, reinforcements arrived in force. By August 10th, the counteroffensive was stalling. By August 13th, Hitler authorized withdrawal, and the losses were catastrophic. Over 100 tanks gone, nearly two-thirds of the armor committed. The survivors limped east toward what would become the Falaise Pocket, and once that pocket closed, the German army in Normandy ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. All of that, Falaise, the collapse, the race across France, was shaped by dozens of moments like the one Callahan lived. A gun that couldn't retreat, a fog that erased sight, a muzzle flash used as a target, and men who stayed not because it was heroic, but because there was nowhere else to go. Sergeant Robert Callahan survived the war. Like most men who survived, he rarely spoke about what happened. Mortain was overshadowed by bigger names. D-Day, the Bulge, the Rhine. But Mortain mattered, because in that gray dawn, 12 guns faced 200 tanks and bought 4 hours that changed the campaign. That's what courage looks like when there's no music. No speeches, no clean victory. Just work. Just fear. Just a hand signal in the fog. And a gun firing at light.